our goal for today is that you can walk away with a better understanding of what goes on in your brain and in your body when forgiveness is achieved, and the, I'll say, order of operations, so the PEMDAS of forgiveness.
Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider.
Welcome back to another episode of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined tonight by my handsome husband, Mason.
Shaking his head over here.
Yeah, we're going to talk about pink elephants. Just kidding. Well, we are. But
well, they're going to come up.
They will come up. So when I ask the question, you'll be able to be at the beginning of this episode, Sarah. All right, I just gave you the answer to a very important question that you will be asked here in a minute. We are talking today about Sarah's theory, which is correct because it came from me. So just in case y'all are wondering.
Yeah, let's just establish that right now, just in case there's any questions.
Right.
Not a theory.
I want to say that I actually talk about this quite a bit in clinic with my clients, and that as I explain this to my clients, for the most part, it really resonates with them, and it releases them from this like burden that they have a responsibility to a perpetrator that doesn't make sense to them. And usually it lends itself to better functioning, less PTSD symptoms, less anxiety, less depression, a lot less shame, because suddenly they have a better understanding of what's going on in their neurobiology, what they are hardwired to do. And when we say hardwired, what we're talking about are systems in the brain that you don't necessarily have cognitive or conscious control over. These are things that we don't even have the technology to fully understand or grasp it, beyond the fact that there does not appear to be a way to change this as an initial response. So we're going to be talking about a lot of these things, and I'm sounding very cryptic in my scratchy voice. So y'all, I'm going to tell you right now, I got the shingles vaccine on Friday after work, and the nurse said, well, you're really young, and the younger you are when you get this shot. So I'll be 42 in March, so I'm young.
Just a baby.
I'm just a baby. Yeah. No, I'm very comfortable in my middle age here. But she told me that it was going to knock me on my ass, and I'm telling you, she was not lying. And about the only symptom I have left today is this lovely scratchy voice, which isn't fair because I had a scratchy voice when I had the flu a few weeks ago. So I'm feeling a little put out here. Alrighty.
You poor thing.
So what are we talking about today? We are talking about
Forgiveness.
And challenging the scriptural teachings that forgiveness is an action word or something that you have to consciously do. Our intention is to help you better understand your neurobiological processes. So this is what we call neuro-informed systems of intervention. And our goal for today is that you can walk away with a better understanding of what goes on in your brain and in your body when forgiveness is achieved, and the, I'll say, order of operations, so the PEMDAS of forgiveness.
I love that. Not the PEMDAS thing, but the order of operations. I love that because lots of organizations, including the Mormon Church, want to talk about priorities, putting things first. I remember growing up, the idea of you had the big jar And if you put the big rocks in first, and then the little rocks, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, and then the water, everything fit in that jar. But if you put the water in first, and then the sand, and then the pebbles, and then the little rocks, everything didn't fit. And so everybody, I think we all have some times in our lives at least where we're thinking about priorities. And I love that. I completely agree. As we talked about this, I completely agree with that idea of just kind of changing the priority of how this works and leading to a better outcome for us.
I love that, Mason. Thank you. So as you were saying that, Mason, I decided to switch up the order of the outline here, just because it feels a little bit more natural and I think it'll go smoother. So you're going to have to just go with me because I had a boss and I said so, and I'm feeling bossy.
Considering the fact that my outline doesn't really look like your outline, I think that will be just fine.
What do you have on your outline? Hold up your yellow legal pad here. Oh, man. That sucks. Your outline is, look at all the wasted space on mine, though. Like, I have intent, and then there's 2 blank lines before I get to the pink elephants on here.
If you could only see the way
We're going to get sued again,
she
man.
outlines, maybe you would shake your head.
All right, so I'd like to start with, what does the Mormon Church, and I'm going to say today we're really talking a lot about Christianity in general.
I think so.
This is kind of a religious teaching. And so today we're going to...
A Christian teaching.
Yeah,
I don't think that Hindu and Buddhism, and I don't know anything about Muslims and what they teach about forgiveness. I don't think they teach this in the same way.
Well, I don't know very much about Hinduism, but I know that Buddhists focus quite a bit on acceptance, or from a clinical perspective, we talk about radical acceptance. And and acceptance of the things, I'm like the serenity prayer here, acceptance of the things that we don't have control over, or the things that we cannot change, is absolutely a step in achieving forgiveness and healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as far as the intricacies of their belief systems, I'm not familiar enough with those. So Mason, I will say that mainstream Christianity, also Catholicism, I see this a lot in my clients who practice Catholicism. And I actually have a large population of Catholic clients here in central Missouri. We've got a very large, is it a parish? I don't even know.
Sure.
Is it an ordinung? Oh, wait, that's the
Definitely
Amish.
not an ordinung, yeah.
We got a lot of those
I think a
too
parish
in this
is appropriate,
area.
but I'm not sure.
Area. So congregation, we have a very large practicing population of Catholics here in our area. And so I'm going to say that, kind of hitting on those most popular religions in the United States. And well, really probably America in general, because Catholicism is, I think, the most practiced religion in Mexico as well. So anyway, Mason, what do the scriptures say? Like, how important is, according to the religions that we're targeting today, what do the scriptures say about forgiveness? How important is it?
Well, of course, there's lots of scriptures about forgiveness. I think that by honing in on 2, we'll see what the general idea or thought process is from mainstream Christianity, and then a little bit more specific to Mormonism. But the first one that I have here is kind of similar to during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches the Our Father, which art in heaven prayer, which says that forgive us our debts even as we forgive our debtors. But in Mark, he says it a little differently, and this is in Mark chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. And he says, this is the Savior speaking, he says, "And when ye stand praying, forgive, if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if ye do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses." And so the thought process here is kind of a tit-for-tat thing almost, right? He makes it clear that you're not going to be worthy of forgiveness if you're not forgiving.
Right.
And I think that's the underlying idea there. Whether you agree, disagree with the idea, that seems to be the underlying idea.
Well, and so I'm going to say, from that scripture, it seems as though most Christian and Catholic religions would say that forgiveness is a requirement. And kind of like we have lies by omission and lies by commission, a lack of forgiving is almost an omission type sin. If you do not do it, you are sinning.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. And I really want to challenge that because in Sarah Westbrook's world, okay, this is Sarah Westbrook's, woo, I love my world right here in my office and recording studio. And in my clinic and in what I do for a living, I see forgiveness as a natural byproduct of healing emotional wounds. And so for me, I say forgiveness is a symptom. And Mason, in our planning meeting, one of the things that we talked about is the Bible and the Doctrine and Covenants say something very, very similar.
Yes.
But in the Doctrine and Covenants, you get it with a little bit more zing.
In typical Mormon fashion, if this is good, this must be better, right?
Oh, yes.
So this is Doctrine and Covenants, section 64, verses 9 through 11. It says, "Wherefore I say unto you that ye ought to forgive one another. For he that forgiveth not his brother his trespasses standeth condemned before the Lord." Very similar to what's in the New Testament, but then here's the kicker. "For there remaineth in him the greater sin. I, the Lord, will forgive whom I will forgive, but of you it is required to forgive all men. And ye ought to say in your hearts, Let God judge between me and thee, and reward thee according to thy deeds." So that's Doctrine and Covenants 64. And yeah, like adds in just a little bit of a zinger there again.
Right, stronger language. You're condemned.
Yeah.
You're required.
Well, and you mentioned one thing that we were talking about that, I don't know, maybe you were going to get to this later, but a person that gets raped, if they're unable to forgive their abuser, suddenly the sin for them is greater than the sin for the abuser. And I just don't see that. I don't agree with that thought process.
Right.
But that seems to be what is laid out here, that
Right.
if you cannot forgive, almost like it's a choice. If you choose not to forgive, then you have the greater sin. And I think we're passing up a whole host of things that need to happen in someone's life
Right.
just to get to healing, not even getting to the point of maybe you can forgive your abuser, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to happen in that person's life before they're even going to be healthy enough to make that choice.
Right. Well, and, a couple of thoughts here. Number one, as you were talking, the thought comes into my brain, ADHD, squirrel, is number one, in religion, we tend to identify a lot of things as sin that just doesn't seem to be sinful to me at all. Like I wouldn't identify a lot of these things as sin. If you've
It's
been
that
raped,
black and white thinking.
right? If you've been raped, and we probably should have put a trigger warning that we were going to use that word there, but abused, chronically abused, taken advantage of, wounded, and you have an uncomfortable emotional response, a prolonged uncomfortable emotional response, or every time you think about that time period, you get the feels again, or you get angry or anxious again, that suddenly that's a sin. And I'm sitting here going, that's a PTSD response. Like,
right.
You can't control that.
Right.
And so why are we calling something that is, again, hardwired into our DNA? Why on earth would God punish us for being exactly what he created us to be? We have those hardwired systems in our brain to protect us so that we don't continue to get hurt. Yeah. And where this gets really personal for me, and, for more information of what I endured in my home, read my upcoming book, which we have finalized a title for. Another squirrel, y'all. Another squirrel.
Is it finalized now?
It has been finalized. It is locked. Well? It is locked in. I got the email from the publisher, and they were like, "We love it. This one is locked in."
Cool.
And watch me butcher it right here for the first time. So if you are listening,
do you need me to find it to make sure?
No. If you are listening, you are among the first to know the locked in title of my upcoming book, and it is Trauma Bonded: Navigating Attachments Forged in Complex PTSD by Sarah Westbrook.
Perfect.
I know.
You memorized it already.
Well, I've only been doing wordplay with like navigating and trauma and attachments.
I know, but there's
for
been
like
so many different ones.
so
I
many
thought for sure you'd mess it up because there's been so many words. That was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So we're
alrighty.
excited about that for sure.
Yeah, trauma bonded, navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by Sarah Westbrook, and I believe our release date is still mid to late spring. I'm wanting to say May time frame, end of April, middle of May, somewhere in there. We'll see. We'll see how long it takes me to get through copy edits now. So copy edits,
So
cover
Squirrel,
design,
anyway, coming back,
marketing. Recording the audiobook. Y'all, this is really exciting. Okay.
So talking about your experiences.
So
that
talking
you
about my
talk about in the book.
experiences is that I was chronically emotionally abused and chronically neglected. From the time I was born, so one of the things that was shared with me by a counselor who did some family counseling with my parents and myself was that they had been able to identify that my parents started blaming me for the challenges in their life specific to sexual functioning when I was an infant. And that blaming of me continued throughout my entire life and is still very much alive and well in their functioning today. I had a conversation with my youngest sister, who I still have a really positive relationship with, and we were talking about, my dad's dogs, and I chuckled and said, that sounds like Daddy, absolutely loving the dogs needing him and having a partner to walk with him. And, it was a very positive thing. And then my sister said something that indicated, yeah, well, he's still working on, something, and we got distracted and we're like, you know what? We don't really want to talk about this. But her comment was, yeah, you're still getting blamed for everything. And I haven't spoken to them since it's been
at least a year, maybe longer.
8 months. No, yeah. May was when the final triggering event happened. It was Mother's Day.
Oh, okay.
Was the final triggering
So 8
event.
months.
So yeah, about 8 months.
6,
I was
7,
going to
8
say, yeah.
months.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
So I haven't even had, I've had zero contact with them. So anyway, but my point being is that we're talking about, I'm going to be 42, so we'll say 41 years of being blamed, chronic emotional abuse, and then chronic neglect in the sense that my dad was the abuser and my mom stood by and did nothing. She would freeze and then she would do nothing. My dad, I remember the couple of times that he beat me and then held me captive in my own home. My mother didn't agree with him, but she did absolutely nothing to stop him. And suddenly, by the church's standards, by this scripture in this book, if I can't forgive him, and almost immediately, like there's this
feeling of urgency,
expectation that if I don't get it done soon, I'm sinning every time I feel a negative response to that. And it makes no sense to me that my difficulty in extending forgiveness, because I'm still in a position of having to protect myself from this man, and then by extension having to protect my children against my father as well. Like,
yeah,
how am I the bigger sinner because I can't forgive him? Because the church's expectation is also forgive and
forget.
Mm-hmm. And the way that gets translated is put yourself, like, jump back in and continue to be the victim. Like, you just got to deal with this shit.
Well, and gratefully, I feel like the message we're getting taught now by apostles now is not get back into the situation, not continue to put yourself in harm's way. But I feel like that message has been taught in the past, and it certainly is still taught that we are required to forgive. And then you add on, I was thinking of in Alma, it says, do not procrastinate the day of your repentance, right? So if I don't forgive, that leaves in me the bigger sin. Well, now suddenly I'm sinning, and I should not be procrastinating the day of my repentance. So I got to get on this right away. And I think what it leads to is a bottling up of pain, because you have to say, I forgive you. I don't want to be held responsible for your sins, so I forgive you. But inside, we recognize, I'm not there yet.
So you said two things that I really like. Number one, I love that you've tied that scripture, do not procrastinate the day of your repentance. Because you're right, if I've sinned by not forgiving, the Mormon church definitely places an urgency on repenting as soon after you've sinned that you're able to identify it. Like, was it Hinckley or somebody who prayed for forgiveness every night? Like
Spencer W. Kimball.
Spencer W. Kimball every single night repented every single night and I remember being like, oh, so if the prophet has to, beg for repentance and forgiveness every single night from the Lord, I must be right. Yeah. I must be so much worse. But then the other thing that you said, my brain just went blank on. Oh, shoot, Mace, tell me what the other thing you said. Repeat the idea. So don't procrastinate.
So don't procrastinate the day of your repentance. So we're bottling things up because we're offering forgiveness, at least by face value. And I would think that a lot of people also feel genuinely that they are forgiving. Like, I don't feel like they're doing it disingenuously, but they're forgiving before they're really ready to forgive. They're certainly before they're healed. And so they're bottling up a whole bunch of unhealthy emotions that are just causing tension and all other kinds of things in their life. Yeah,
and that really leads us into the next section here of the outline. This is where we're getting back into where I skipped something. And what happens is if I forgive you, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that look like? What does forgiveness feel like? So if I have successfully forgiven somebody, what do I experience in my mind?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, Mace, go ahead, answer.
Well, I'm going to give, I guess, kind of some of the canned answers that have come from my upbringing, but there's the idea of losing a weight. You feel free from something that has been weighing you down. You feel peace.
So you feel
happiness.
You're talking about the feeling inside of your body, not the thoughts, which is fine. We'll go with that first. So if I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, that is a sensation that I am lighter.
Yes.
That something's not heavy.
Yep.
That I'm able to move and navigate my world better. Yes. And I would say that, you say, oh, these are the canned answers that I was taught in childhood. And yet when we do research on forgiveness, those are the pretty standard answers.
Right. I don't think they're wrong.
Right.
That's just I'm just acknowledging that that's where they come from for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I hear in clinic is less tension in my belly, less tension headaches, less tension, less tension, less tension.
Yeah.
When I talk about what happens in my mind, the things that I hear in my clinic are, I don't think about it as often anymore. Like every now and then the thought still comes up, but I can let that thought go pretty quickly. I hear things like, I don't have to worry as often, or I'm not as jumpy. I'm not as anxious. I'm not focused on it. When I do think about it, I don't get stuck in that ticker tape like it's running on loop in my head. I hear things like the intrusive thoughts go away. I hear things like I can talk about it with other people and I don't get tied up in knots, or when it comes up, I'm not like dysfunctional for the next day or two. I might hear about it. It might still bother me for a minute, but I can take a few deep breaths and it's gone again. So we talk about kind of this release of uncomfortable underlying emotion or tension, discomfort, heaviness, darkness, and worry.
Yeah.
And so if that's how you know that you have forgiven somebody, when you're in a hurry to do so, when you've got this, don't procrastinate, and you better forgive them, because if you don't forgive them, you're sinning. What inevitably happens is I'm going to say things like, I forgive you. And then when the thought comes up, I've forgiven them, I don't want to think about this anymore.
Right.
And you get caught in a habit called thought stopping. And so I'd like to give you an exercise today, dear listener, that I utilize in clinic to illustrate what thought stopping might feel like and explain a little bit clinically and neurobiologically what's going on for you. Yeah, Mason, you have a question?
I just have a thought before you get into explaining that. And maybe this is misplaced in where we're going, but the thought that immediately occurred to me is, if you're forgiving too early, and I feel like a lot of people that forgive too early still feel some of that relief. They feel the weight coming off. But I think that, and this is just my thought process, I think that the weight that is lifted is the guilt that we put on ourselves. Like we, in this religious context, oh man, I got to forgive this person. I don't want to be guilty. So I put this extra burden on me. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm able to forgive, even when it's too early, I haven't healed. And of course, you're going to get to that. I haven't healed. I've just made a choice. I've made a conscious decision that I'm not going to focus on this anymore, whether that works well or not.
Right, because forgiveness is a quote unquote action word. It's something
right.
I have to do. So once I've checked the box, said the words, and I'm focused on forgiving.
Right. The guilt then goes away. I don't think that the actual piece of forgiveness really goes away.
Right.
We kind of have a false sense of that because I don't feel guilty about not forgiving anymore. Inside, I might still feel, and I have a personal experience with this that I might share later on, maybe isn't the best right now, but that idea of feeling like you've forgiven someone, so the guilt of not forgiving is swept away, at least at that moment. But later on, something else comes up that brings it back, and I start to feel some of that again. But because it doesn't come on all suddenly, I don't really feel the weight coming back on me.
Right. And I love that idea. I want to rephrase it this way, is that the pressure to do what I'm supposed to do for God is gone.
Yes.
But what's left?
The pain still of having been
right,
hurt.
We still have the worry. We're still having the anxiety. We're still having that. But it turns into something else.
Yep.
It turns into resentment.
Mm. Yeah.
It turns into resentment because I'm not healed. It's like stitching up a wound when you still have shrapnel in your muscle. It's gonna fester. It's gonna irritate. You have to remove the antagonizing foreign body and allow the musculature and the ligature and everything those fibers to reconnect. And will you have a scar? Yeah. And unless you've got some sort of serious brain injury, when I say, hey, how'd you get that scar? You're going to be like, oh, yeah, an IED went off and I took a piece of shrapnel to my thigh, whatever. You can tell that we're military-related peoples. Post-military here.
Yes.
Right. There might still be a scar, but you can acknowledge I can walk okay, and it might look a little ugly when I look at it, or, I'm going to tattoo it so it looks really beautiful now. Right. I've seen some really cool tattoos that cover scars up. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful art.
Yeah.
Is what I see. But if it's healed correctly, the severity of the long-term effect of that injury is usually less.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that analogy is limited because there are certain things like, if you get your leg blown off, of course you're going to still walk with a limp. But if things heal correctly, you can move on in your life with a lot more ease. Yeah. So I would say, how do I know if I'm feeling better because I've checked a box and my brain says, okay, I'm good? Or I'm feeling better because my body has actually released the burden that it's been holding on to? And my answer would be, what's the long-term effect?
Yeah.
Because if there's resentment, you have an unhealed, festering, emotional wound that needs to be addressed for true healing to occur. And again, in my opinion, for forgiveness to present itself. Because for me, forgiveness is, again, the natural byproduct of a healed emotional wound.
It sounds almost like you're saying that forgiveness is the gift that you receive for having healed from a situation.
I mean, you could word it that way if that works for you. I like to look at it as forgiveness is the symptom that I know I'm doing okay now.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a symptom or the absence of a symptom. When you're sick and you have a fever, yay, when the fever is gone. Well, what does no fever mean? Well, it means my body has fought off the infection appropriately.
Yeah, at least for the moment. Yeah.
Right, and so prolonged peace about the situation. Forgiveness is the symptom that lets you know
that you're healing.
That you're healed.
Yeah.
All right, so let's come back to this forgiveness, this idea of I have to do it. It's what God expects me to do. If I don't do it, I'm sinning. So I'm going to skip over addressing the underlying issue and healing the underlying issue so that I can check off the box. I forgave you. Now I got to work on the forgetting part. And what we end up doing is thought stopping or minimizing our pain. We also end up minimizing other people's pain, and we take away the perpetrator's need for accountability oftentimes.
Yes.
The ignoring that something is there. And so I want to give this analogy about the pink elephants. So my question for you that I gave you the answer for at the beginning of the podcast is, how many times today have you thought about pink elephants? Mason, how many times today have you thought about pink elephants?
This is a funny one because usually I know the way where this is going to go because we've talked about it several times, but I don't actually usually think of a pink elephant, and I'm not sure why. I think it's because I don't have much imagination. But the answer is, until you and I started talking, I hadn't thought about pink elephants at all.
So maybe 2 or 3 times or 5 times because it's Sarah, so she's repeated it like a million times, whatever.
A few times the thought has now come up for me.
Right. So I'm looking at my recording. So this has been going on for 31 minutes. So for the last 31 minutes, I've thought about pink elephants maybe a handful of times. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Mason.
But before that, I hadn't thought of pink elephants.
So Mason, when I ask you to think about them, so if you're not thinking about them, think about them now, dang it. Okay.
Everybody,
Mason,
close your eyes, focus, unless you're driving.
Right.
Or running or whatever.
Eyes open. Don't close your eyes unless you want to. So Mason, when I ask you to think about pink elephants, what images come to mind for you?
Pink elephants on parade. Fantasia. I think that's the first time. That's the only time I can
Fantasia,
think of.
the Disney movie. For me, it's Dumbo, the Disney movie with pink elephants on parade. Absolutely. Okay. And so what, and to our listeners, please answer this question. Your answers are going to be different than ours, and that's good. There's no right or wrong answer.
Everybody has a different experience
to any of this. Right. Yeah. So Mason, what smells come to mind for you?
I don't get any smells. Again, I don't have much of an imagination.
Okay, well, what might the pink elephant scene in Disney smell like?
Maybe I would think peanuts. Okay. Peanuts would come to mind.
Oh, look, that imagination's...
Poop might come to mind. Mud. Popcorn. Because the elephants, for me, are mostly attached to the circus or movies like The Jungle Book or things like that.
Okay. For me, it's pancake syrup.
Wow.
Oh, no. Because I remember growing up watching Dumbo while my mom made pancakes. And we were going to eat pancakes. So I smell pancakes and syrup when I think about pink elephants. I have a lot of clients talk to me about like seeing like a pink stuffed animal. And so it might smell like lavender or candy because of those scented stuffed animals. So yeah, again, any answer is correct. What do you hear?
I hear the song from the Jungle Book and the thum, 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 thum.
Gosh,
We're
nobody,
a military man. Whatever, I forget
nobody
what it is,
turn us into Disney. Disney, we're giving you credit. Okay, we're giving you credit. Maybe we should recommend and cite Disney movies
something
today.
Like, are you sure this water is sanitary? It looks questionable to me.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, so that's what I think of.
Tarzan,
yeah.
All right, so Mason goes to Disney. Alrighty, so the sounds for me is also Disney. It's the song Pink Elephants on Parade with kitchen noises in the background.
Uh-huh.
Alrighty, so Mason, what feelings, what sensations, like if you could touch it, what do you come up with? What do you think?
Leather, I guess.
Mine's carpet.
Saggy leather.
Mine's carpet.
See, I don't have
Under
anything.
my
I don't
butt.
have anything associated with this except for just the movies themselves. So.
Alrighty, what does it taste like?
I hope to never
Stop
taste
thinking
an
about
elephant.
pink elephants, Mason. What are you thinking about?
I'm still thinking about elephants.
I told you to stop. I am your wife and your boss.
Well,
I told you to stop.
There might be
What's
just a
going
little
on?
bit of like rebellious nature going on here. You can't tell me what to do.
Right? Alrighty, so most people, and I don't have a percentage. I know that it's up near 80%, but I would have to go back in and look at this. But with most people, when given an exercise where they pull a thought into their mind and then they utilize their 5 senses, so sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, as they pull in that imagery and those the senses and the sensations, there's the word I'm looking for, the sensations. When somebody says, stop thinking about this, the brain does not obey. The other people, where they go off on a tangent and are already thinking about something else, have a high prevalence of ADHD. So I always tell my clients when I'm doing this, it doesn't matter what your answer is, just be honest, because whatever your answer is gives me data. Now, Does that mean if you were not thinking about pink elephants, you have ADHD? No, it does not mean that. But people who have ADHD have a really difficult time holding thoughts in their brain, and also thoughts stop naturally on their own quite a bit, which can be very difficult to function around. It interrupts functioning. So why did I give this exercise?
To demonstrate that in general, the more you want to not think about something, the more that you think about it.
Right. It's that law of scarcity or deprivation. So things like yo-yo dieting, this happens all the time. If I'm trying to lose 10 pounds and I tell myself absolutely no brownies, I spend the next however long being
Thinking
able to
about
only
brownies.
focus on brownies. And when I finally give in to the temptation and I'm like, I'm just going to have a bite. I'm just going to have a bite. A whole pan later, I've completely destroyed my diet. That's one of the things that happen. We actually learn Noom, the app Noom, the weight loss app Noom, actually teaches not to do that. They teach you how to allow yourself to have things in moderation, because when we deprive ourselves of something, our brain says, no, danger, that must mean I need it more. So when I tell you, don't think about pink elephants anymore, your brain naturally wants to hang on to...
I'm back in the Jungle Book again.
Right, are you really?
Yeah. Yep, as soon as you said that.
You know, I give this exercise to my clients. So if you are a client and you are listening, you're like, whoa, she really did do that to me in session. And if I haven't, call me out on it, y'all, because It should be around session 2 to 3. I give you this little demonstration. So yes, when I have new clients, this is very common, and every single time I do it, even though I'm trying to stay engaged with the client, I am back in my living room on the carpet of the last house I lived in Snowflake. And I am hearing my mom making pancakes, because that was the meal she made most often for breakfast, watching Dumbo with my little brothers and sisters, like making noise around me, waiting for pancakes with syrup on them every single time. So yeah. So when I tell you don't think about pink elephants anymore, it is natural for your brain to go back there. In fact, thought stopping is thought to cause a micro trauma response in your brain. So for example, when we have an abrupt shift in thought, that is an indication that something threatening has occurred. So for example, Mason, if you and I are driving home from the grocery store and we're talking about the vacation that we're going to take to, I don't know, Mexico. That's where we're going next, right? Yeah, we're going to Mexico. We're going to cruise the Mexican Riviera soon.
Yep.
And so you and I are talking about our excursions as we're pulling out of the grocery store parking lot. Let's say we get T-boned. When the car stops moving, are we going to still be talking about the Mexican Riviera?
I doubt it.
Absolutely not. Because that T-boning has overridden. There's been a threat to the brain. The amygdala has kicked in, and I am focused on, are you alive? Am I alive?
Right.
Are we bleeding? Are the
Priorities
kids
have
okay?
changed.
Are they okay?
Yep.
Is anybody else going to hit us? Like, priorities have shifted abruptly. That is a micro trauma. And so, and you know, I have to kind of chuckle because I remember a general conference talk where they were like, if you're having bad thoughts, stop thinking those bad thoughts and replace it with singing a hymn. And I'm like, I'm so musically inclined, y'all. I've been a musician since I was little, and I can't sing a hymn. I mean, I can sing a hymn and think about something else in the background. Like, Mason, you do everything while singing. So I can think about things and hum or sing a hymn. That does not work for me. It works for some, but we have debunked thought stopping. It was actually a therapeutic technique, part of CBT, for a really long time, until therapists were like, this does not work. Because when we force the brain to stop thinking about something or to stop addressing an emotional response or a thought that is going on without a knowledge that we're going to come back to it and address it in the very near future, you get resistance. You get that deprivation brain space, which means you're going to think about it more. It's going to come up more often. And the level of intensity that it's going to come up is going to increase. And over time, you may not still be thinking about necessarily the exact triggering event, but you're going to start acting with more anxiety and depression and high intense emotional responses to seemingly small stimuli, the more you ignore the healing process or these thoughts that you've committed to getting rid of because you need to be successful at forgiving. And so inevitably what happens is you give up, or you are constantly forgiving somebody over and over and over again, which creates resentment. And suddenly you're just grumpy with really no day-to-day cause for being grumpy. This is that natural state. When we let things emotionally fester within us, they will eventually explode. They will cause increased cardiovascular disease because our blood pressure is slightly elevated for a long, long time. So chronic elevation of blood pressure because of stress, anxiety, worry, fear, lots of flashbacks. Even if it's not full-blown PTSD, it comes back into your brain and you're rehearsing it in circles over and over again. These things happen. Right. You're creating physiological stress on your body, which is why, once again, I say forgiveness is a symptom.
So basically, it sounds a little bit like if there's not a healthy end to the conversation, then you're going to continue to think about it or whatever.
What do you mean by healthy end to the conversation?
Meaning that I think the word I was looking for is resolution. So we're talking about going to Mexico. In your example there, we're going to Mexico. If we resolve that conversation and we figure out how we're going to end that conversation today, whether or not it's over, but we figure out how we're going to end that conversation today, then we won't spend more time thinking about it later on until the time is coming. But if you don't do that, then it's going to constantly come back. I see that for myself, that we're not able to, so we get distracted or whatever.
Right.
I'm constantly coming back to that conversation because there was no healthy resolution to that situation.
Right. So when we talk about synaptic processes, what we do instead of, so therapeutically, what I do is I teach people how thought stopping doesn't work. And then I teach them something that I call thought shifting or cognitive reframing. And really it comes back to kind of that RAID, the A in RAID, which is accepting the pieces that you don't have control over, as I don't have control over this, naming the emotion, leaning into it, allowing us to feel it, understand what's going on for us about this emotion or response, accepting what we can do, accepting what we cannot do, getting that curious space. Because frankly, when we thought stop, because thought stopping is a micro trauma, not only does it stop the thought that we're having, at least immediately, so that it kind of gets shoved down, but it also stops curiosity. It stops our ability to process things and understand things. It stops our ability to see things differently or in a new perspective. It stops the brain. It's a traumatic thing. Just like if I get T-boned, I'm not thinking about the Mexican Riviera. I am thinking about, am I safe? Am I alive? Am I breathing? Right. How's my car? How's my family? Who do I need to call? I'm in. I've had a complete shift of thought. Now, does that mean that this type of trauma is going to create like PTSD? Everybody experiences micro traumas on a day-to-day basis. That's normal. As you can resolve those and work through discharging, work through completing the emotional cycle, discharging those emotions through healthy exercise and healthy nutrition and meditation and all of these other things, then what happens is, yes, the brain is able to resolve them. So I teach people how to cognitively shift. And the way to do that is something along the lines of, Mason, let's say that you did something and it made me mad. I might be able to say, you know what? I'm feeling really pissed off right now. And that's okay. It's okay that I'm angry because what Mason did was hurtful or it embarrassed me. And that's a normal, natural human response to have from Mason, from whatever it is that you did. So for example, when your brother told us that our marriage was doomed, I was really upset. I was really defensive. I was hurt. I was like, what are you, what? Just that, where did this come from? And so in order for me to, quote unquote, forgive him, I had to get to a place where I was, telling myself things like, you know what, Sarah, it's okay to be upset. That was very disrespectful. That brother does not hardly know us. He's made almost no effort over the course of our marriage to get to know us or to see how we function in a relationship. That brother does not have the skills or the tools to communicate differently, as is evidenced by what he's done. I, like Brene Brown, believe that people are generally doing the best that they can. Right. And that I had to lean into that discomfort. And then I did my self-soothing things in my meditation, and I got validation from you. I had friends that, validated, yeah, I'd be angry too. That was really rude. That was really disrespectful. And then as I gained that understanding, that underlying understanding of what was going on, or what was most likely going on for your brother, because I can't know for sure.
Sure,
I'm not
not
a
at all.
mind reader.
Nope.
So when I build these narratives of things like brother doesn't have the communication skills to have done that differently, or brother was most likely feeling defensive. In this case, it was he felt like he was justified, which is what he eventually told us. He felt he was justified because my Facebook post upset his wife. Right. So for him, he was coming to his wife's defense. And so he was feeling defensive. I can respect that he was feeling defensive. I don't agree with his decision, but I can't control that. Right. I was able to reevaluate. Did I say something on purpose to harm my sister-in-law? And the answer is hell no. The post wasn't directed at anybody specific. It was just me sharing an opinion that they disagreed with. Right. So as I understand the nuances and the pieces of what occurred, when I'm building that narrative of brother didn't have the communication skills, I'm also in a brain space where I can say, I might be wrong, but based on the evidence I have, this appears to be the most correct. Right. As I gained that understanding, I could then extend grace towards your brother in, he's never had anybody teach him how to do this, and he's got certain traumas and difficulties and other things in his life that are not mine to share on this podcast that might interfere with his ability to gain those communication skills. And Mason's family is not really a big fan of counselors at all. So I get that. I understand that. I get what happened. I'm okay now. I can move forward. Right. And as I gained that understanding and was then able to extend grace towards the quote unquote perpetrator, forgiveness just happened. Now, there are some perpetrators you're not going to be able to extend grace to. So I don't want you to think that extending grace is a requirement for forgiveness. There are certain violent things that happen to people, or horrific things that happen to people because of negligence, that maybe there is not a place for grace in that situation.
Well, and I think this all just comes from your place of healing. You're talking about forgiveness being the symptom. You're able to, in this situation, going back to the situation with my brother, you're able to examine it. You're able to objectively, at least mostly objectively look at the situation, try and be empathetic towards him and try and figure out where he's at to the best of your ability. In some situations, you might be able to call that person or text that person and say, hey, this really kind of pissed me off. What's going on here?
Right. The ability to readdress, like
to investigate.
If it's safe.
Right.
Investigating, utilizing non-accusation, calm tones, like using the Gottman communication methods.
Right. For
so
some
that you can
people,
gain that understanding. Yes.
In some situations, you'll be able to do that. In other situations, you'll recognize if you're in that healthy place. Because if you're not in that healthy place, you might seek out that confrontation in the hopes that it will heal because, well, we got to talk about this, but you're not in a healthy place. And so I think that through that story, you've kind of demonstrated this idea that if I am healing from my trauma or from that situation or whatever, if I'm in a healthy place, those situations I'm going to be able to handle differently, examine appropriately, and then probably be able to let them go or decide if I can't let them go or decide how I want to handle the situation rather than out of guilt or this angst for not being held responsible, rushing right into and saying, no, we got to work through this, we got to be okay, when what you might need is time.
Well, and I think that's really important, the time piece, because when your brother sent me that message, my responses back to him in the heat of the moment were beautiful. Like, I've gone back and I've looked at them and I'm like, oh, Sarah, you nailed that. Like, wowza. And I sent it to some other people that I trust. I even like crossed out his name and like posted it in some ex-Mormon things. And was like, hey y'all, look at what this, what do you think? How did I do? And people were like, whoa, you were amazingly calm. And I can say I nailed it because of my professional experience of remaining calm under fire. Now, having said that, I was angry, like mad angry for months because he never came back and apologized. And if you can't in my world, if you do not accept accountability for the thing you did wrong, you're not safe. Because it means in my world, you're most likely going to quote unquote perpetrate again. Right. And I use that word perpetrate for everything from I called you a mean
small
name
to large,
to horrific abuse. But yeah, if you can't say, you know what, I acted like an asshole, I'm sorry. My hackles are still up, and not so much that I was angry at him for months, but I was not willing to engage in any kind of conversation with him. For one, there's a lot of history there of him not knowing how to show up, and that's a boundary for me. I'm like, I'm done. You're not going to keep treating me like this. So bam, no communication is better than that. Until he came out and served his week at Fort Leonard Wood, and the only reason he apologized was because you called him out on it, and his apology wasn't really genuine. I mean, he basically was like, well, I'm an ass and you just have to deal with it sometimes. And I'm like, ugh. Well, and my resentful brain was like, what are you, 10? Well, and then I was like, ooh, Sarah, not nice. Have to come back to, he hasn't been trained with the same type of communication skills that you have, and that, you know, you've made Mason learn.
I think that his apology was genuine, but it was not as what is the word I'm looking for? Not as complete. That's not the word I'm looking for, but I think it demonstrates what I'm talking about. Forthcoming, I think maybe is what I'm thinking of. It wasn't as complete or forthcoming as it could have been or needed to be. That doesn't take away from the genuineness of it.
I disagree.
It just doesn't. It takes away from the effectiveness of it.
I'll concede. My thing is when we come back to the thought stopping, the expectation, which I feel stems from that religious belief of you just need to forgive and forget, was I did something bad. You should have forgiven me by now and just moved on.
Yes.
Which means he gets to skip accountability,
which you mentioned
for the
earlier,
emotional wound. So when you are forced to apologize, it doesn't come off. For me, it's not as genuine because it's still minimizing. It's a lack of, I don't have to take accountability because you have the responsibility to forgive me without me taking any accountability for what I've done. And the evidence that apology doesn't feel genuine to me is not even a few months after he said that apology. You know, you invited them to listen to the podcast, and the things that came out of his mouth again were even worse. Yeah. And I was like, that authenticity in this apology isn't there. Yeah. And I have a really hard time with that. I am not a believer in I'm required to forgive and we just move on and stop talking about it. That is toxic. That is unhealthy. And that was the expectation of my parents too. I want to go back. Go ahead, Mason.
And I think that there's some room for us to recognize that there was genuineness there, but also it's incredibly important and healthy for us to be able to recognize what the lack of complete apology means. Like you just said, tying the idea that, well, you have to forgive to the fact that means you don't have the offender doesn't have to take accountability for what they did. That just sets you up for more abuse down the road. Right. Because, well, if I forgave, everything's good, right? Everything's cool. And of course, that's not the case. Right. But that's the thought process that goes into that. Well, she forgave me, so we're okay. We're good. but I haven't done anything to apologize or to mend or to reach out and make things better.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like I need to...
One-sided.
Yeah, I like that one-sided. Okay, yeah. I want to put in a plug-in again because the best book I've ever read about apologies, which effective apologies lead to healing, which leads to natural forgiveness, is Why Won't You Apologize by Harriet Lerner.
Yes.
I cannot recommend that book enough.
Me either.
It is life-changing because what happens for me in this situation with your brother, and what I'll then reiterate in the situation with my father, is I have to recognize that your brother doesn't know how to apologize effectively. So what he gave me was the best of what he is capable of or was capable of at that time. I also have to recognize that it is not my job to make him do it better.
Yes.
I can invite him to, but if he doesn't take that invitation, there's nothing I can do about it. That's that piece of accepting the things I cannot change. It is the reality of the situation. And then I get to evaluate. These are data points.
Right.
Am I going to go to a family reunion where your brother is there? Well, your brother, the brother-in-law, all these people that find enjoyment in attacking me and ganging up on me based on so much data of past experiences. Do I want to continue to engage in that? And the answer is, unfortunately, no.
Right.
I won't go to a family reunion where they are present, not because I'm being petty, although that's how they might see it.
Sure.
But because I have a self-boundary in that I will not purposefully put myself in a position where I will be verbally and emotionally abused, because all it's going to do, because I know me well enough to know that I'm not going to sit back and take it. My mouth will run away with me. And because I have a master's degree in ethical manipulation, when I use my skills unethically, I can cause a great deal of pain. And I recognize in myself, I don't have any more patience for that bullshit.
Right.
And so I will not go to protect them as much as to protect me.
Right.
But I will absolutely continue to engage in respectful conversation, and I will visit the siblings and the family members who respect me and who treat me well. So if you want to have a relationship with me, that behavior has to change. And if you're not in a place where you can change that, I've had a place in my life where I'm okay walking away and being happy and living my life. And I'm very grateful for that skill, because there's no ill will regarding those incidents. I've processed them. I have forgiven those individuals because I feel that I have the best understanding I am able to gain at this time in my life. And I have a plan to be well boundaried and protected in a way that supports the relationships that bring me joy.
Right. You can respect that they did the best that they could do, but also recognize that's nowhere near enough for you to put yourself in that situation again. Right. And I think that's important just because it's healthy. It's healthy for me to be able to recognize, you know what, that was a terrible apology, but it was better than anything I've ever heard from them. It feels like there was a little bit of progress there. I'm grateful for that. However, I'm not putting myself in a situation where the same sort of thing is going to happen again. I'm not fighting. I spent an hour on the phone with my brother before he came over and apologized. And it was not a happy conversation. I mean, parts of it were, of course, but a lot of it was not. And so I appreciate the effort that he put in to make an apology, but it wasn't enough to just invite him right back into my home.
For me, it felt like he was placating in order to smooth things over, rather than actually feeling.
I don't think it was completely that, but I think that there was certainly an element of that. Yes.
So, and that kind of takes me into the story of my father. So, and again, I want to make sure that the listener understands that there's not a normal time frame for this healing to occur. If I was still mad at your brother, that would be completely reasonable because of some of the horrific things that he said.
Sure. And has not apologized for.
Right.
He's not made any attempts.
But even if he has apologized for it, if I'm still struggling with it, I have that right. Because for some people, they can go through this process in a couple of hours or a day or two. Great for them. But
Right.
for other people, it takes longer. And there are so many contributing factors to why forgiveness for some takes so long that there's no way for even a counselor to say, I think you're hanging. I mean, I can tell somebody, hey, it feels like you've hung on to this for a really long time. Can you help me understand that? But it's
Right.
not appropriate for me to be like, you've held on to this for too long. Time to let it go.
Again, investigation over
Right.
judgment.
We
Right.
got to get into
Yeah.
that curious space, because if you're hanging on to something for longer than you feel is healthy, well, let's get curious as to what's going on, because there's something going on. But the expectation that you should be over it by now isn't appropriate. And we see that same thing with grief. Like, people try and put a
Yeah.
timeline on grief.
Yeah.
Grief is never ending. It just changes over time in how it affects you. Like, I'm
Sure.
still grieving the fact that I don't have a healthy relationship with most of your siblings. That's really sad to me because I really wanted that.
Right.
But I also have gotten to an age where I'm kind of done on investing in that, because I've got so many other things that I'm doing and so many failed attempts that unless I see some sort of miraculous change, I'm kind of good with keeping my boundaries where they're at right now.
Well, and you can, that person that's been grieving for what some might think is an inordinate amount of time, if you become curious and you investigate and you say, can you help me understand why you're still struggling with grief? Then you can figure out what's going on. You might be able to teach them, especially you in your position. You might be able to teach them how to manage things differently. You might be able to share some thoughts that kind of change the way they look at things, their perspective, and then they're able to work through it better.
Right.
But it has to start with investigation. It has to start with curiosity. It has to start with empathy. I really want to know what's going on here, not because I want to teach you how to overcome it. I want to know.
And I would say that in clinic, when I see people get stuck and hanging on to anger or resentment for a really long time, there are usually deep-seated underlying traumas from early childhood that individual doesn't even necessarily recognize as having an influence on them. The other really common thing I see is that the client is, I'll say, emotionally constipated, in the sense that they do not know how to experience a full range of emotions. And
Right.
so, bitterness or irritability or dismay all comes out as anger, because they don't have the permission to feel. There's
Right.
another great book.
Right.
The permission to feel, so that they can work through this process. So yeah, if you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like you are hanging on to hurts and wounds for longer than feels appropriate to you, seek professional help.
Right, absolutely.
Because if this same situation had happened to me 15 years ago, I'd be pissed still. It'd be years and I'd still be mad. And, I look at my daughter right now, my 14-year-old daughter, who gets big mad and hangs on to it for a prolonged period of time. She doesn't have the cognitive development yet to work through all of this process or the experience. I didn't get taught how to do this until I was in school, learning
Right.
it as the way to teach it to my clients. And I'm like, oh, I got to learn this before I can teach it to anybody. And it changed my life. So I kind of want to go back to, what about chronic abuse or chronic neglect? What if I've been taken advantage of by somebody who is unapologetic my whole life? And I can say, if that is who you are, I'm right there with you, because I was abused emotionally, verbally, probably sexually, although my memory of that is not crystal clear. It's very fragmented. And had somebody just stand by and let it happen, I was physically abused. From the time I was very, very small, and I desired for years, more than anything, I just wanted to be loved for who I was. I just wanted to be accepted, and I wanted my kids to have a really good relationship with a grandpa, because I have a really good relationship with my mom's father. My grandpa T is a man that I absolutely adore, who I have always felt safe with.
Yeah.
And I remember the stories of my mom talking about the years that he was an alcoholic and he scared her, and seeing him as a grandpa not being that person anymore, and not being that person probably because of his joining the Mormon church. Like when he joined the Mormon church, he gave up alcohol
That all changed
and he
for
never
him,
went back. And so, I can understand the hold my family has, my mom's side of the family has, on the beauty of Mormonism, because it healed my grandpa from a really icky place in his life.
And change your mom's life.
Changed my mom's life, changed all of her siblings' lives. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously that took years. And so, of course, I'm coming in when grandpa's doing pretty darn good. So my experiences with Grandpa T are not traumatic, not horrific at all. I hoped that my dad could do that same thing for my kids because of how valuable it was.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he couldn't. It was not within his skill set.
Not emotionally, for sure. Yeah.
I did not forgive my dad until I was probably in my mid-30s. And then every time he would, quote unquote, reoffend. And when I say reoffend, with my children, he never got anywhere near as bad as he did with me, because I wouldn't let him.
He didn't have that opportunity.
He did not have that opportunity. He would do something, usually a smaller slight, and I would jump right down it and no, that's not okay. Back off. And I was that barrier, which also meant I got beat up quite a bit.
Right, which means you took more emotional
Right,
abuse from him,
I took more of it. But in my mid-30s, what helped me finally reach forgiveness for my father was understanding and gaining a little bit of insight about the trauma that he experienced growing up. And again, I can't share that because that's not my story.
Right.
But when I understood the things that he had gone through, and I recognized that he was awful to me, but he did a better job than his mother did. And so for him, this is a success story.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have that capacity to see that his success story still made him my abuser. And then my recognition that if he admitted to that failure, he admits that he's like his abuser, which is terrifying. He doesn't want to be that person. Just like if somebody says, you're just like your dad, I want to throw up. Like I physically, I get nauseous. I've gagged. Like it's so distasteful if somebody says you're like your dad. That is like one of the biggest, cut me to the core if you tell me I'm like my dad. And that's really sad because in a lot of ways I'm like my dad in a really good way. Like I'm super creative at coming up with solutions to problems and working with my kids and whatnot. And that way I'm like my dad in a positive way.
And he worked hard to get to where he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that he's better than his parents were.
Right.
He worked hard to get there. It's hard then for him to be able to turn around and say, yeah, but in this situation, I screwed that one up bad.
Yeah, and he's never been able to do that. The only apology I've ever gotten from him was, "I'm sorry if you felt like you weren't loved. I know what that feels like because I wasn't loved." And and he feels like that statement should be the umbrella to cover all
absolution,
everything, right?
Absolution.
He confessed his sins, 6 penance,
right,
7 Hail Marys, and you're good.
right,
Right? And it doesn't work that way,
Of course
y'all.
it
Does not work
way,
that way.
yeah,
But as I understood what he went through, and then I accepted the fact that he either could not or would not do better, I was able to let the hurt go. But it took me, I'm going to say that the anger really set in for me when I was 16 years and 2 months old. And I was not able to really release that until 10 years after I started seeing a counselor for the first time. And that every time he reoffended, I had to do it again until it got to the point this last May that I said, I can't anymore. The risk is too high. I don't hold anger for it anymore. I've been able to release that anger. I'm able to talk about what happened without having that emotional response. So again, when I say, what does forgiveness look like in my mind? When I think about it, it doesn't cause nightmares. It doesn't cause huge grief. It doesn't cause anger anymore. It doesn't have that hold on me anymore. And in my body, I feel light. I feel like there's been a release. I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. And I also am okay with not having contact with him anymore because I recognize that if I have contact with him, he will hurt me again, or he will hurt my family again. And I cannot do that.
Yeah, I had a thought as you were saying that, because of course I've heard this before. But a thought in the religious context, I think that we talked about initially, the message that you have to forgive and not walk away from your abuser, and I didn't really have a context for that. But then this verse popped into my mind where the apostles asked Jesus, "How often should I forgive?" And the apostle says, "Until 7 times." And Jesus says, "Not until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. And I'd never really thought of it in this context, but I think that really pushes this idea forward that we're not to walk away from the accuser. How can I forgive? Accuser, abuser, the offender.
Okay.
Until 70 times 7, right? Like I got to keep track. And of course, 70 times 7 is often explained or interpreted as meaning forever, right? You forgive until forever. And I think that really lends itself to that idea. We've talked multiple times about implied messaging. And I feel like that's an implied message, that you don't walk away from the abuser or the accuser or the offender. You keep on forgiving until what? Till they finally figure it out?
You keep trying, or the idea that they are family and you don't walk away from family.
Right.
And I'm going to say, walk away from people who continually, intentionally cause harm.
Yes.
Because if somebody is intentionally harming you, their ability to change or their willingness to change is grossly limited. You will continue to get hurt. In people who are not intentionally harming you, but are consistently, inadvertently harming you, you've addressed it, and over time they're not demonstrating the progress that you need to feel safe. you can walk away. There is, this is, if I
think
followed,
you have to.
Right, if I followed everything in the scriptures, then I would, have to lay down with my rapist.
Right.
And that's not healthy. That's not safe. It's not how we're wired. It's not what we're supposed to do. So we've got to be able to look at the Bible as a flawed document. If you believe the Bible to be the Word of God, recognize that it is flawed. I don't believe it to be from God. I think that there are amazing lessons of morality and standards in the Bible, but I just can't take it as the end-all be-all God's word, because there's a lot of shit in there that does not make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Of a loving Father and Creator. I mean, the God of the Bible is a bipolar basket case, y'all. He needs meds and therapy. That is my opinion. Mason's over here laughing at me, but that's my opinion. But for those people who hold those words near and dear, I would encourage you, think critically about some of these things. I can forgive my dad over and over and over again, but I can do that from a distance. I do not have to engage. And in fact, since disengaging, I'm happier. Mason, I would say you feel happier. Our kids are more at ease. And about the only thing they say they miss is the swimming pool and their grandma. Yeah. They all miss their grandma. But grandma couldn't stand up to him. She could not do it. And as such, she could not stand up for my children and keep them safe.
Well, and she can't come and see us even by herself because she gets punished for it at home.
Right. But it's terrible.
My thought about the Bible is that if you hold 100% to the Bible, which a lot of people do, you have to recognize that there are many, many times in the Bible that it is, I feel, specifically driven to keep you loyal to God and church above all else. And in an unhealthy way. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being loyal to God or to a church or anything like that. But when you find that loyalty is causing you to be unhealthy or unkind to the other people in your life, I don't think that jives with the God that we're trying to portray from the New Testament. But then once you start to recognize that there is a human element to the Bible, the exactness with which religion wants us to hold to it is gone for me, because then I can recognize humans were involved in the production of this book. Some made mistakes out of just their humanness, and some made mistakes out of their desire to control people. And I think you can see that, but ultimately you have to be able to step back and go, okay, what does this teach me to do, and how does that affect the people around me? And I think that can be very helpful, because like you said, there's lots of good things in the Bible, lots of very good things in the Bible. But if you can't recognize that there's also some fairly toxic things in the Bible, I think you're fooling yourself.
So I love everything you just said, except for the you have to part. I'm going to challenge you to watch those you have tos, because nobody has to.
I think that, yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. I think that to avoid the toxicity that can come from religion, control, religious power, it becomes necessary for us to recognize where that toxicity comes from and how it is embedded in our very religious culture and nature. I say nature because I think John Larson kind of described this. Like, if you're taught from the time that you can't even speak that this is who Jesus is, this is who God is, or whatever, it becomes very much a part of your nature because it's all you've ever known.
You're taught it before you can think.
Yes. It becomes something that is a part of you, not by choice, not by genetics, but very much still
Through your
a part of
environment.
you, because you had no choice but to swallow it hook, line, and sinker, and it becomes part of who you are.
Can we call this Mason squirrel?
I don't think it really is a squirrel, but sure.
So, y'all, thanks so much for listening tonight. I just want to close with reiterating or reinforcing the idea that when my clients hear this, when my clients hear that the action that they can take to achieve forgiveness is focusing on healing, empathy, and understanding, where it's getting in touch with your vulnerability and holding space in a safe way for that vulnerability within you or within others. Forgiveness is the natural byproduct that indicates success. And once again, how do I know I've gotten there, Sarah? Long-term effect. When you think about the triggering event, what's going on in your mind? What is your cognitive brain doing? What is your body doing? Do you feel tension? Are you feeling emotions in a very intense way? Does it ruin your day? Like, pay attention to what's going on for you physiologically. Because if the long-term effect is still physiological discomfort or tension or resentment, you have not yet achieved forgiveness, because you have not yet achieved healing. Healing comes first. In the very beginning of this podcast, I think it was Mason said something along the lines of, we're doing things out of order. You're right. We're asking people to quote unquote problem solve through forgiveness before they understand what the problem is and how it's impacting them and what it's doing and how it's bleeding into other areas of their lives, of your life. Yeah. You have to understand and heal first. Forgiveness comes second. Just like in my marriage, I teach that Gottman method, which is understand first. And until you feel understood and heard and understood and valued, and your partner feels heard, valued, and understood, problem solving is not effective. You cannot effectively forgive someone who has harmed you without experiencing internal healing of the emotional wound. In my opinion, it's not possible.
It's almost like by forgiving, we're projecting our healing onto someone else.
Ooh, I like that. I've never thought of it that way.
And maybe, it's not the abuser. Maybe it's God. That if we're promised, if we're able to forgive, that God will forgive us.
Right.
So it's almost like we're projecting our healing onto God in an unhealthy way, because we're giving it away. And there's context for that too. One of the other verses that I thought of is that has come up a couple of times is the "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The idea being that you cast your burden on him in exchange for his burden on you. And I think that some of that is causing a projection of healing, that he's just going to pull out his magic wand and heal us without us going through the natural process of managing, of dealing with it.
Yeah, what you're talking about is what we call spiritual bypassing of, I'm just handing this one over to Jesus and I'm not going to worry about it anymore. That's thought stopping.
Yeah. Well, maybe sometimes that's all you can do, but it's not the way to really heal from a situation.
Well, and I think handing your burdens over to Jesus, for me, if I believe in that, is that handing my burdens off is accepting what I can't control.
Sure.
And just trusting that I'm going to continue to do the best I can and lean into my tribe that is helping me and holding me up. So that's what that means to me. But yeah, I want to challenge the Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith, that's a terrible verse. Think you, blah, whatever. And challenge the Bible. I don't think that God requires us to forgive. Not at all. Because if there is a God, and the way that I've been taught about this God is that when I can't heal it all the way myself, he'll pick up that slack.
Yes.
But that doesn't release me from the action of needing to do what I need to do to heal. Like, I can't leave the shrapnel in my leg and be like, well, God's going to get that out of me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's a soldier somewhere listening to this going like, well, I still have a piece of shrapnel real close to my heart. And I'm like, yeah, and I bet you get that like checked out frequently, or you're supposed to get it checked out frequently because, yeah, baby.
Yeah.
But I really want to drive home the point that if you focus on healing, if you put your energy and your effort into processing, completing the emotional cycle, getting to a place of understanding as best as you possibly can, that forgiveness comes all by itself. It comes on its own. It is the symptom of healing.
Yeah, I think that the Jesus that I know and understand would have said something more along the lines of getting yourself to a place where you can forgive is going to be a very good thing for you. And the humanity of power turned it into a guilt process that allows for control. You know, this is now a requirement because that's how I'm going to be able to control these people. Whereas I think Jesus would simply say, you know what, when you get to the place where when you can heal enough that you can let all of that go, which would be considered forgiveness, you're going to be a lot better off. And it's been twisted a little bit. But yeah, I like the way that you've prioritized that. Heal. Figure out how to be loving and empathetic to yourself. And then that will naturally translate into being loving and empathetic of others.
Well, and I think that it's, in closing, I also want to put a plug in here. There are some wounds that are so deep that the expectation that you're going to heal all the way to where you're just going to be able to forgive is unrealistic and unreasonable.
Yeah.
In those cases, make sure you've got somebody you can talk to that you can trust with those vulnerabilities, and do the best you can. Because some wounds might cause a permanent limp. Other wounds will cause permanent disability.
Yeah.
And others will kill you.
Yeah.
And that is human. We are not invincible.
Definitely not. And we don't heal from everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So make sure that those expectations are realistic for yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you've got one of those types of wounds, I want you to surround yourself by people who can help hold you up as you endure those hardships and trials that are usually worse than most people can truly comprehend unless they've been in your shoes.
Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening tonight. We love you. See you next time.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life.
Shake it, baby, shake it.
Pink elephants on parade. Pink elephants, pink elephants. Disney's gonna sue me. Pink elephant.